Welcome everyone. This is the Every Student Succeeds Act webinar, October 27, 2016. We are recording the meeting for people to be able to watch it after the live session. My name is Catherine Musgrove. I'm with the Office of Virtual Education with the South Carolina Department of Education. And to start this evening's webinar, we have Molly Spearman, our State Superintendent of Education, who will open up with some opening comments.
Thanks, Catherine, and good afternoon, everyone. I know we've all had long days at work, so I really appreciate you taking the time out to be on the webinar tonight. This is an exciting time for us. A lot of work has gone into this draft that we'll share with you tonight. It's on our website at this point. If you haven't already looked at it, please do that now. But the bottom line is we want you all to know that this work will not be completed until we have had sufficient time for our stakeholders to give us their input, suggestions, any questions that you have. We believe that with your help that this document can only get better. So please feel free to ask questions, not just tonight, but as you think about this, as you watch this process and talk with your colleagues, please don't hesitate to send us your ideas, suggestions, anything that you might disagree with. We want to make this right. We know that No Child Left Behind was with us for many years and it had some excellent points, but we know that we learned as we went along of ways that legislation and that act could be improved. So certainly we've been given a lot of flexibility in South Carolina to write our plan that matches our profile of South Carolina graduates. So we need your help. Thank you for being on, and with no further ado, I'll turn this over to Roy Steele, who is the Director of our Federal and State Accountability Office. Roy?
Thank you, Molly. Good evening, everyone. My job tonight is to give you a quick overview of the Every Student Succeeds Act, and I'll just move through some of our slides. The Every Student Succeeds Act is a reauthorized version of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that was first passed back in 1965 during Lyndon Johnson's presidency. And the purpose of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was to ensure that all students had fair and equal and significant opportunity to obtain a good education and reach at the very level proficiency on challenging state standards and assessments. Particularly with the Every Student Succeeds Act, there is special emphasis on certain at-risk subgroups of students. South Carolina receives about $270 million in ESEA funds in all of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act programs. The law was authorized in December of 2015, and a period of transition will occur and is occurring now, 2016 through 2017, and beginning with the school year 2017-18, we'll begin to transition into the new major programs or the revised major programs in the law. As a requirement, all states, including South Carolina, submit a plan to the U.S. Department of Education. South Carolina has chosen to submit what's called a consolidated state plan instead of single applications for every program that's contained therein in the law. So we are talking a bit about the consolidated state plan, and that's what you're listening to tonight. We are going to basing the consolidated state plan on the vision for the profile of the South Carolina graduate, which you can see on the screen. It's also on our web page. And I know that if you've been in meetings and trainings around the state, people have been talking about the profile of the South Carolina graduate. Just to give you an overview again of the current law, the Every Student Succeeds Act, in the law, as in No Child Left Behind and its predecessor, Improving America's Schools Act, there are state activities, that is, activities for which each state receives funding and carries out programs. There are also national activities authorized by Congress and may or may not be funded during the course of reauthorization or during the course of the length of the law. ESSA also contains formula and competitive grants. Formula grants are those where money is distributed, funds are distributed to the states. The states distribute those to school districts or schools based on a formula. Also, there are some competitive funding opportunities available in the Every Student Succeeds Act. And then, of course, there are the requirements, compliance requirements, and assurances for the various programs. The law is kind of like a book. It used to flow in chapters. Now it tends to flow by title. And so I'm just going to walk you briefly through those. Title I, which most people have heard of, Title I Part A, is the largest program that is operated in South Carolina in terms of funding. But there's Title I Part A, B, C, and D. They receive the largest share of funding. Title I is also the area in the law that includes requirements for college and career-ready standards and requirements for college and career-ready assessments. Title I is also the area where there are requirements for a single state accountability system and the requirements for school improvement, and folks will be talking about that as we go through the plan. As I said, Title I is the largest part. It includes basic program, state assessment, migrant programs, and programs for neglected and delinquent students. Most of the funding that is received under Title I flows to the school districts and from the school districts to schools or programs within that within the school district. So the bulk of Title I money flows out to the local school districts. Title II Part A, Preparing, Recruiting, and Training Teachers, Principals, and Other School Leaders, is as it said. It's largely funds that we receive from the U.S. Department of Education and used for professional development and in some cases for reduced class size. Title III Part A is our English language acquisition program. It is supplemental to the core English learner program that is required by all districts and schools where we have English language learners. Title IV, we have two areas where we do receive some funding. Title IV Part A is a new program, Student Support and Academic Enrichment Grants. That's new. Guidance has just been released on that. We'll be getting information out to folks on that as soon as we have, one, everything in place, and two, we know what the funding is going to be. Part B is one that we've had for some years, and that's the 21st Century Community Learning Centers, which funds a lot of after-school programs around the state. Part C relates to charter schools. There's some funding that the state can, from time to time, apply to work on charter schools, and the same is true with magnet schools and Part E, family engagement. Sometimes those are funded, and sometimes they're not. Title V, called Flexibility and Accountability, allows us, Part A gives us some instruction about transferring federal dollars and how to do that from program to program. And Part B is the Rural Education Program, what's called the Rural Low-Income School Program. We have about 40 school districts in South Carolina that are classified as rural school districts and receive some funding under Title V. Title VI is Indian and Native Hawaiian and Alaskan Native education. There are a couple school districts in South Carolina that do receive some funding for our Native Americans, the Native Indian. Title VII is impact aid, and our districts that have significant federal properties, such as our military bases, districts can receive some impact aid. And then there are the general provisions in Title VIII and a lot of sorts of things that go in there. One of the areas, Part D, offers us the opportunity to apply directly to the U.S. Department of Education, in some cases for waivers, and we have done that in the past and we will do so in the future as warranted. And then Title IX, homeless, the McKinney-Vento Homeless Act is included in Title IX, and there's a new section related to preschool that is in Title IX as well. Just in general, the major elements, what has changed in many ways, the English language learner accountability, which was in Title III, is now in Title I and will be part of the base accountability system. As indicated earlier, there's an increased emphasis placed on at-risk subgroups, including our homeless, our foster care children, and our migrant children. There is also emphasis placed on at-risk students not being taught by inexperienced, out-of-field, and ineffective teachers. And that will be talked about later as we go through the program, but that is new for ESSA. The highly qualified requirement, which is part of No Child Left Behind, has ended. ESSA requires that teachers be properly certified for the subjects and courses that they are teaching. The instructional paraprofessional qualifications that were in No Child Left Behind continue in the new law. We do have greater flexibility in ESSA than we had in No Child Left Behind. We have greater opportunities for ourselves as a state to craft our accountability system, our standards, our assessments, and greater flexibility in some of the programs that we're able to run. There will be a change in the test for supplement, not supplant, which is a fiscal area. There will be increased emphasis placed on professional development, and the ESSA flexibility waiver, which we had prior to the passage of ESSA, most of those provisions expired. There are still a couple in place to carry through the transition. Now, as we mentioned earlier, and what folks will be talking about with you, is the consolidated state plan that we have to submit. And since we chose the consolidated state plan components, they include consultation, coordination, challenging academic standards and assessments, accountability, support, and improvement for schools, and supporting excellent educators and supporting all students. And then there'll be specific information in the consolidated state plan on the various titles, particularly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 9. Our timeline, we started development with a framework in June, and we organized 6 work groups that got together to look over the proposed federal regulations on submitting the consolidated state plan. There are no final regulations at this time, so we're operating on what was published as proposed. And as I indicated, those were the work groups, so we had those. June through July, we kind of went through the law and said, okay, what do we have to do? What do we need to, put in the law? And then to put a plan out so that the public and our stakeholders would have a plan, or at least a draft framework of a plan to comment on. July through August, we completed that, kept refining it, and as we are now in October, we're having a webinar. The draft plan framework is published on our state website. And as Molly said, we welcome your stakeholder and your comments throughout that period. It's also required that there be a 30-day review period by the governor's office. February through March, we'll complete draft framework and convert to templates and send to the U.S. Department of Education by March. And at this point, I've finished the overview, and I'll turn it over to our consultation and coordination work group and Scott Winburn.
Thank you, Roy. This is Scott Winburn. Hello, everyone. I am a lawyer with the Department of Education, and my job is to oversee the consultation and coordination work group for the ESSA state plan. And if you go to the next slide, please. Just to a couple of points here. As you can see, we must engage in timely and meaningful consultation with stakeholders. The timely and meaningful language is important here because although there was consultation and coordination required under No Child Left Behind, Congress did not emphasize the timely and meaningful aspect. So our goal here is to do what we're doing now, which is consult with stakeholders and incorporate stakeholder input in our state plan, which will ultimately be submitted. I don't want to bore you too much, but I wanted to read from the published proposed regulation, and if you want to look this up, it's fairly easy to find. It's in the Federal Register. It's volume 81, number 104. It was published Tuesday, May 31st, 2016, and as Roy mentioned, these are proposed regulations. But what they do is really lay out fairly clearly what we are required to include in the framework for the Consolidated State Plan. For example, under Section 299.14, it clearly it lays out the 5 work groups that we've divided the state plan into, and the first one is consultation and coordination. And just a quote from the Section 299.15 under consultation and coordination, and I'm quoting, it is in its consolidated state plan, each SEA must describe how it engaged in timely and meaningful consultation. And so again, Congress has emphasized the need to make this effort meaningful. The stakeholders that we must engage with, I think it's important that the proposed regulation lays out in great detail all of the stakeholder groups, and so I'll list them quickly. The governor, members of the legislature, members of the State Board of Education, LEAs, including LEAs in rural areas, representatives of Indian tribes located in the state, which South Carolina has some, teachers, principals, other school leaders, paraprofessionals, specialized instructional support personnel, and organizations representing such individuals, charter school leaders, parents and families, community-based organizations, civil rights organizations, institutions of higher education, employers, the public. And so as you can see, the proposed regulation goes into a fair amount of detail, and I think that's important. The other aspect of this section of the proposed regulation is, of course, coordination. The South Carolina Department of Education must describe in its plan how it is coordinating all of the programs authorized under ESSA. And these programs, again, listed in the regulation are the IDEA, Carl D. Perkins Career Center, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, Head Start Act, and it goes on. But I mention that because that is a decision point to raise, and a question that we've been asking around the state of stakeholders is to tell us and provide input how you believe our programs authorized under ESSA can coordinate better, can coordinate more efficiently. So that's part of this process, and we welcome your input. If you could, next slide, please. As Roy mentioned, this is the timeline of events. As you can see, we have just posted the draft framework, so I think we're on schedule, so to speak. But the rest of the time, we will be devoting considerable effort to incorporating stakeholder input. So please look at the draft plan that's posted on the website and provide your comments. Email them. We've got a link that we'll go over later for that. But again, the Consolidated State Plan should be submitted in March after the governor has 30 days to review it. So that's kind of where things stand. If you go to the next slide, please. And this is my contact, so please, I welcome. You can call me, you can email, and of course you can submit comments through our website. So I encourage you again to look at the draft plan. A couple of other activities to mention. On November 21st, we're going to have a focus group meeting. We're going to host it in Columbia, so be on the lookout for that invitation. We'll post that on the website. Please keep an eye out for that. We're going to have a follow-up focus group meeting in January, again, to incorporate stakeholder input in a meaningful way. So thank you very much for your attention and your interest. And this presentation will be posted on our website, so please feel free to tell your colleagues to go to our website and take a look at it. And I think that's all I have, and now I'll turn it over to Liz Jones, Director of Office of Assessment.
Hi. Okay, I'm going to talk about universal designed assessments first. A universally designed assessment is designed and developed to allow participation of the widest possible range of students, including students with disabilities and English language learners. And they're designed to do this without jeopardizing the measurement of the content standards that the tests are designed to measure. Tests in South Carolina are developed according to universal design principles. And when we design tests that way, we make sure that the items and the tests are developed to remove characteristics that could create difficulties for any group of students. To ensure that we do this, we bring in groups of teachers and other educators and people from the general population to look at the items, and they review the items and check for any bias or sensitivity, and make sure that the items don't create barriers for any students, or make sure the items don't lack sensitivity to disabilities, cultural, or other subgroups. In addition, we conduct a wide range of statistical tests to determine whether the items are functioning differently for particular populations. The state provides schools and districts with a list of valid accommodations for English language learners for each of their assessment programs. School-level teams use these lists as a guide to select appropriate accommodations for the English language learners. Students who use these accommodations during testing receive scores that provide the same educational benefits afforded to other test takers. The scores do not contain flags to indicate that the accommodations were used. Test results can only be valid if students are tested in the same language in which they're taught. English language learners are instructed in English, therefore the assessments are in English. The office receives federal funds that are used to pay a portion of the cost of federally mandated assessments. These funds are used to pay for item development, test form development, and for the administration, scoring, and reporting of the assessments. It didn't go ahead. Okay. Excuse me. The department supports the revision and development of challenging academic content standards that define what all students should know and be able to do. These are aligned with national and world-class standards and serve as a basis for decision-making, policy development, and selection or development of curricula at the district. The statewide assessments are aligned to the standards. For students with the most significant cognitive disabilities, we also adopt alternate academic achievement standards that are aligned with challenging academic content standards and the required subjects and grades. Students are administered assessments that are aligned to these standards. Along with 35 other states, South Carolina has adopted the National Worldwide Instructional Design Assessment, called WIDA, for English language learners. These standards are research-based and address the domains of reading, writing, listening, and speaking. The department provides resources and professional development opportunities to support effective teaching of advanced courses in middle school. These are designed to support the learning needs of students performing at all levels. Now I'm going to turn it over to Carla Hopkins.
Thank you, Liz. I will be presenting on the Supporting Excellent Educators. The first subsection of this particular section deals with South Carolina's system of certification of teachers and principals. South Carolina has a two-tiered certification system for teachers. Certificates can be issued at the initial or professional level. Beginning educators are issued an initial educator certificate and may advance to the professional educator certificate upon meeting all state requirements for advancement, including successful completion of the induction and summative evaluation requirements of South Carolina's System for Assisting, Developing, and Evaluating Professional Teaching, also known as ADEPT. Educators enter the profession and become certified in South Carolina through various approved pathways, including traditional college or university-based teacher preparation programs, alternative certification pathways, and the work-based certification program for career and technology education teachers. To advance from Tier 1 to Tier 2 principal certification, school leaders must successfully complete the state's principal induction program during the first year of employment as a school principal and earn a rating of proficient or exemplary on South Carolina's program for assisting and evaluating principal performance during their second year of employment as a school principal. The majority of newly certified school principals in South Carolina have completed a traditional preparation program at one of South Carolina's universities with approved school leader preparation programs or at an out-of-state traditional preparation program that meets South Carolina's certification requirements. To enter the three-year alternative pathway leading to certification as an elementary or secondary principal, a candidate must demonstrate at least 3 years of leadership experience comparable to that of a school leader, must be offered employment as an assistant principal, and must be recommended for participation in the program by the school district superintendent. We will next move to South Carolina's system to ensure adequate preparation of new educators, particularly for low-income and minority students. State law provides authority to the State Board of Education through the South Carolina Department of Education, the SCDE, and the Commission on Higher Education to develop and implement a plan for the continuous evaluation of upgrading of standards for program approval of undergraduate and graduate educator preparation programs in the state. The State Board of Education requires that all teacher preparation programs meet the standards established by the National Accreditation Association, with which the SCDE has a partnership agreement. South Carolina has entered into a partnership agreement with the Council for the Accreditation of Educator Preparation, also known as CAPE. Public institutions are required to seek national accreditation or meet national standards, while private institutions are encouraged to do so. To meet CAPE Standard 2, Educator preparation providers must ensure that effective partnerships and high-quality clinical practice experiences are central to preparation so that candidates develop the knowledge, skills, and professional dispositions necessary to demonstrate positive impact on all pre-K through 12th grade students' learning and development. CAPE Standard 3 requires educator preparation providers to recruit diverse candidates who meet the employment needs of hard-to-staff schools. Please note that South Carolina has developed an add-on certification field and a specialized certification endorsement in teaching children of poverty. At this time, I will turn the presentation over to my colleague, Christine Joannis, who is the Director of the Office of Educator Effectiveness.
Thank you, Carla. Next, we're going to be talking about professional growth and improvement for leaders and teachers and school leaders, and we'll start first with teachers and then move into professional development improvement for principals. Could you advance the slide for me, please? Thank you. The professional development improvement for teachers is supported through a tiered system of performance evaluation and related supports, as outlined in the Expanded ADEPT System Guidelines and Regulation 43-205.1. Teachers who possess a valid South Carolina teaching certificate and have less than 1 year of teaching experience begin with a 1-year induction contract. Each local school district must develop and implement a plan to provide guidance and assistance throughout the first year. There are 2 stages of teacher development: annual and continuing. Teachers who have completed their induction year may be employed under an annual contract. They are evaluated and assisted with procedures through the Expanded ADEPT Support and Evaluation Guidelines. Annual teachers develop and implement a professional growth plan and are either formally evaluated or provided diagnostic assistance and later formally evaluated as appropriate. Annual teachers successfully complete a formal evaluation by meeting all state and local requirements and then are offered a continuing contract. Teachers are offered advancement through the Foundations in School Leadership program that's provided by the Department of Education Office of School Leadership. In this program, teachers develop and refine their leadership skills that can assist with their transition into administrative positions. Advance, please. The professional development improvement for principals and other school leaders, as outlined in Regulation 43-165.1, through the Program for Assisting, Developing, and Evaluating Principal Performance, or PADEP, implementation guidelines. First-year principals begin in Tier 1 and participate in the Principal Induction Program provided by the Office of School Leadership. Induction principals are to receive written feedback from superintendents or designees regarding all 10 standards in the evaluation instrument. During the principal's second year, they are formally evaluated on all 10 standards. Principals who successfully complete the Principal Induction Program, or PIP, program are proficient according to the formal evaluation and are advanced to the Tier 2 level. Tier 2 principals are evaluated each year, and they receive feedback from the superintendent or designee at least 3 times during the school year, and develop and implement an annual professional growth and development plan based upon strengths and areas for growth, as well as school-wide goals aligned to the school and district strategic plans. There are several opportunities for principal advancement through the Office of School Leadership. Regulation 43.1-165.1 holds school districts accountable or responsible for the implementation of these PADEP guidelines. Anyone evaluating principals must be formally trained regarding the standards, the criteria, the regulations, and the evaluation instrument, and district procedures in accordance with state and local requirements. Advance, please. Also, with in this section of Supporting Excellent Educators addresses the use of Title II Part A. As Roy mentioned earlier, Title II is typically put in the direction of professional development. I am speaking here about the state activities portion of Title II Part A. Roy also mentioned that this is a transition year. So currently we are using Title II Part A funding to support our South Carolina Teacher Advancement Program, or TAP program, of which there are 74 South Carolina TAP schools at this time within 17 different school districts. These funds are used to support student growth-based incentives in order to meet these criteria in accordance with our state equity plan. Going forward, we will be looking at how to use these funds to support ESSA initiatives. Advance, please. Prior to ESSA, we were already working on implementing a new teacher and principal evaluation system. ESSA allowed us to slow down the implementation in order to develop a meaningful system with the intent around professional growth and development of educators. We have also taken this opportunity to collect stakeholder feedback. We have collected and are continuing to collect feedback through focus groups, surveys, working groups, and stakeholder presentations such as this. We have already received input from over 11,000 educators around the state and through 18 focus groups, as well as a statewide survey. We will continue our work with teachers, administrators, colleges, universities, and agencies, professional organizations, and community members as we move forward to develop and implement a revised ADEPT and PDEP system for the state of South Carolina. This slide here shows just an annual timeline. We're using this as a recalibration year, an opportunity for us to take a step back and make sure that we are engaging stakeholders in developing meaningful systems. We are then going to be moving into the readiness and training for the implementation of a full statewide implementation of the expanded ADEPT and PDEP evaluation systems across the state. Advance, please. I'm going to now turn it back to Carla Hawkins, and she'll move on into the next section.
Thank you, Chris. The next section is improving the skills of educators in identifying students' needs. The SCDE must describe in a state plan how the agency will improve the skills of teachers, principals, and other school leaders in identifying students with specific learning needs and providing instruction based on the needs of low-income students, lowest achieving students, English learners, children with disabilities, children and youth in foster care, migratory children, homeless children and youth, neglected, delinquent, and at-risk children identified under Title I, Part D, immigrant children and youth, students in local educational agencies eligible for grants under the Rural and Low-Income School Program, American Indian and Alaska Native students, students with low literacy levels, and students who are gifted and talented. The next section that we will visit is the section dealing with ineffective, out of field, or inexperienced teacher, or as we commonly refer to as IOI teachers. The SCDE must demonstrate whether low-income or minority students enrolled in schools that receive funds under Title I, Part A are taught at a disproportionate rate by ineffective, out-of-field, or inexperienced teachers compared to non-low-income and non-minority students enrolled in schools not receiving funds under Title I, Part A. We come to the section of this particular portion of the presentation where we need to hit on some decision points. We need for you, our stakeholders, to give us some input on how to define the following terms. The SCDE must establish and provide in the state plan definitions using district criteria so that each provides useful information about educator equity and disproportionality rates for each of the following terms. And you may find the draft definitions of these terms in our Consolidated Plans framework on the SCDE's ESSA webpage. We must define a statewide definition of ineffective teacher, or statewide guidelines for local education agency definitions of ineffective teacher that differentiate between categories of teachers. The SCDE collects overall teacher and principal evaluation data annually. Districts are to determine whether a teacher has met or not met established standards as outlined in the Expanded Adept Evaluation and Support System guidelines. An ineffective teacher is currently defined as any teacher receiving not met rating as outlined in the Expanded Adept System guidelines. Guidelines are subject to change upon system feedback and the South Carolina State Board of Education's approval. We must also have a statewide definition of out-of-field teacher. The required credentials for professional staff members in the instructional programs of South Carolina's public schools establishes the acceptable certification credentials for educators working in various settings and roles. An out-of-field teacher is currently defined statewide as a teacher who does not possess the requisite certification or certification permit for the course of grade level to which he or she has been assigned. Additionally, we must have a statewide definition for inexperienced teacher. An inexperienced teacher is currently defined as an educator with less than one year of teaching experience. Operationally, an inexperienced teacher is defined as one on an Induction 1 contract. An inexperienced school leader is defined as an educator in his or her first year as a school principal and enrolled in South Carolina's Principal Induction Program. With regard to low-income student, it is currently defined as a student who meets any of the following South Carolina Poverty Index indicators: Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, Foster Child, Medicaid, Homeless, or Migrant. The current draft definition for minority student includes, at a minimum, a minority student is defined as a person who is American Indian or Alaskan Native, Asian, Black, or African American, Hispanic, Latino, Native Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islander, or two or more races. With regard to rates, the SCDE must annually calculate and report such as through a state report card, statewide, based on student level data, the rates at which low-income students and minority students enrolled in Title I, Part A schools are taught by ineffective, out-of-field, and inexperienced teachers, and calculate and report, based on student-level data, rates at which non-low-income and non-minority students enrolled in non-Title I Part A schools are taught by ineffective, out-of-field, and inexperienced teachers. If it is determined that low-income or minority students enrolled in schools who receive funds under Title I Part A are taught at disproportionate rates by ineffective, out-of-field, or inexperienced teachers, the SCDE must describe the root cause analysis and provide its strategies, including timelines and funding sources, to eliminate disproportionate rates demonstrated. The SCDE may direct local educational agencies to use a portion of their Title II funds to give low-income and minority students effective teachers, principals, and other school leaders. And this is a slide on disproportionalities and percentages. I will now turn the presentation over to John Payne, Director of the Office of Special Education Services.
Thank you and good evening. As you've heard throughout this presentation, there is an emphasis in ESSA on supporting all students and the diverse students that make up our classrooms throughout South Carolina. So as part of our work thus far, we have convened work groups to look at how the state supports the diversity of children and students who make up our state, and how those children have available appropriate equal access to a well-rounded education to ensure that they graduate high school. In our initial work so far, we have convened a number of different offices and divisions within the Department of Education, including the Office of Special Education Service, Federal and State Accountability, Office of Student Intervention Services, our Chief Information Officer, our Office of Transportation, Early Learning and Literacy, School Transformation, Nutrition, Standards in Learning, and Family and Community Engagement. As we're making sure that we're addressing the needs of all students, the areas that the specific work group have been addressing is how the SEA, or the Department of Education, ensures that all children have a significant opportunity to meet challenging state academic standards and career and technical standards and attain a high school diploma, which links very nicely with our profile of the South Carolina graduate. In order to do that, we also need to address the continuum of a student's education from preschool through grade 12 in order to support appropriate promotional practices and decrease the risk of students dropping out. We also are addressing equitable access to a well-rounded education, particularly where female students, minority students, English learners, children with disabilities, and low-income students are underrepresented. You heard, for example, about how we're attempting to do that with respect to our educator preparations. In this, we also want to address bullying and disciplinary practices, parent, family, and community engagement, and specific steps that address specific subgroups of children that we serve. Those particular children are children who are English language learners, low-income students, lowest achieving students, children with disabilities, children in foster care, migrant children, homeless children and youth, neglected, delinquent, and at-risk students, immigrant students, and American Indian Alaska Native students. As Scott Winburn mentioned during his comments a little earlier with coordination, we want to work to make sure that we're coordinating all of the other requirements with not only with the ESSA, but the other federal and state laws that we're doing to ensure that we're maximizing what we do and minimizing duplication of our efforts. So we've begun some draft narrative thus far, addressing how the actions and the steps we are taking to support English language learners, our virtual educational opportunities, the work we're doing with our preschool continuum, our career in technology, delinquent and neglected programming, educator effectiveness, family and community engagement, services to students who are gifted and talented, services for children who are homeless, transportation of students, school bullying and harassment, our special education, technology and bullying, particularly cyberbullying, support to children who are migrant, and then again this continuum of services from preschool through grade 12. Decision point and discussion areas that we certainly are asking feedback is there are new requirements for improving services to children in foster care with a new required position in ESSA. So we're certainly interested to hearing any recommendations on supporting better services to children who are in our state foster care system. As well as there is within ESSA additional emphases on our English language learners. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sheila Quinn, our Deputy Superintendent for Innovation and Effectiveness.
Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you tonight to talk about the last section of our presentation, which is our new state and federal consolidated accountability model. And you can see the title of that model that we would like to brand it as South Carolina Succeeds. We want this model to focus on all of the things that are helping our state move forward and helping our students graduate college and career ready. I want to start the presentation tonight by thanking several people who have been very integral to the work that you're going to see presented tonight and also the draft that's posted on our website. We have had several accountability work groups. We began with 3 work groups that were made up of individuals from school districts, teachers, principals, district office leaders, superintendents, as well as members from the Commission on Higher Education, the Technical College Board, members from the General Assembly, and the legislative staff there. We also have had a tremendous partnership with the Education Oversight Committee. I want to thank Melanie Barton and all the members of her staff who have contributed to the work that you see here and continue to work with us collaboratively. And a very special thank you to the Superintendent Work Group, several superintendents, district superintendents who have given more than 10 or 12 days of their time to sit down and really think through these pieces. So I'm going to go through several parts of the accountability model tonight. You're going to see a draft on our website that has a lot of red in it. And the red is because we are still continuing to work with all of the accountability groups that you've heard me mention before to make this model the best it can be. And so the red is there to tell you that those are sections where we're still discussing and making decisions. And it looks like my slide advancer is not functioning there. Thank you very much. So the purpose of accountability. Several entities across the country have talked about reasons for accountability and different purposes for accountability. And you can see those mentioned on the slide. Many people think that the purpose of accountability is to rank and sort schools so that the public is aware of high-performing and low-performing schools. And that is certainly a function that has occurred from accountability. Others believe that the purpose is to provide meaningful information to stakeholders about school performance. And then finally, there is the opinion that accountability systems should be developed to drive continuous improvement. We are seeking in South Carolina to develop an accountability model that focuses on continuous improvement and gives our stakeholders the best, most robust information possible in a way that's easy to digest. And again, my slide advancer there. Thank you. I'm putting the profile of the South Carolina graduate up again. I know you saw it at the beginning of the presentation, but I really want you to focus on the 3 sections for just a minute. If we are developing an accountability model to produce a graduate with world-class knowledge, world-class skills, and world-class life and career characteristics that are going to help them be successful beyond K-12 education, what would we need to measure? What would be included in an accountability system? And so we have really taken to heart these 3 sections of the accountability model and tried to be sure that we're being sensitive to all of the different elements that we should be measuring. From the 30,000-foot view, what the ESSA requires from an accountability system is that we establish what we are calling in South Carolina key performance indicators. And we are looking at 5 to 6 leading indicators to include in the accountability model. Second, we're required to measure school and district and state progress towards those indicators. And then finally, we have to take action with respect to schools and districts who are not making acceptable progress on the indicators. And that action takes the form of support and intervention. As a part of ESSA, in the accountability model, we have to develop long-term goals and interim targets to reach the long-term goal for all students and for all the subgroups that you've heard the others talk about tonight. There are 3 areas that you're required to set long-term goals and interim targets, and that's in achievement on your state tests, on your graduation rate, and a new one for accountability in Title I, English language proficiency. In our plan that you're going to see on the website, you're also going to see a goal related to college and career readiness. That's not required by ESSA, but it is something that is important to our state stakeholders. The macro goal, the kind of elevator speech goal that you can say and remember, is that by 2030, 90% of students will graduate in 4 years and will be ready for college and career, or college and career ready. Why 2030? 2030 was set originally because in 2017-18, when the new accountability model kicks in, students in kindergarten will graduate in 2030. So it's a generational goal. Lately, we've also been talking about maybe that needs to be a 2035 goal so that we can begin birth to when those students would graduate. So that is under discussion. Why 90%? Well, currently in South Carolina, there are some students who are not going for a standard South Carolina diploma, but instead an occupational credential. We are working on that with an accountability work group that is separate from this accountability work group to begin thinking about how students with the most significant cognitive disabilities can work towards a diploma. But 90% is the goal that we are setting at this point in time. And then on this slide, which just has a little bit smaller font, maybe quite hard to read at this point, but you can see it in the accountability draft plan. We have set sub-goals related to the areas that ESSA requires that we set sub-goals. And the first one is in achievement. In achievement, we want to reduce the number of students who are scoring in the does not meet expectations category of our state assessments to 10% or lower. Why are we focusing on getting students out of that bottom category? Because we know students in the bottom category on our state assessments, whether that is SC Ready in grades 3 through 8, or end of course exams in the high school, English 1 and Algebra 1, we know that if they're scoring in that bottom section or bottom tier, that they're not on a trajectory for college and career readiness. And so we want to have a state focus to move those students out of that bottom category. Graduation rate, as we've said, is a 90% in 4 years and 100% in 5 years. We are setting, ESSA requires that if you set a 5-year target for graduation, you set a higher target, and we would like to set a fairly aspirational goal to have all students graduate by the end of 5 years. In the area of English language proficiency, we are just beginning to analyze our Access English language test data. But you can see here that the two sub-goals, one is for growth and one is for proficiency, focus on measuring the number of students who are increasing at least one composite level, moving from, for example, level 1 to level 2 or level 2 to level 3 annually, and as well as at least 50% of our students meeting their individual proficiency target, which is a level 5, by the timetable set by WIDA of when they're supposed to hit their proficiency target. And what that means is when students enter a program for English language learning, they are given a baseline assessment. And based on that baseline assessment, the WIDA will project when that student should be proficient in English. It's also based on the student's age. And so we will be using those factors to set a proficiency timetable. And then finally, the last goal, which is the one I alluded to that's not required by ESSA, but we feel very strongly about it. It's called our Prepared for Success sub-goal. Is to ensure that 90% of our students graduate with some evidence of college or career readiness. And this is a big game changer for our state because the focus in the past has been on just graduation, and that's certainly a lofty and important goal, but now we want students to leave our schools, again, with some tangible evidence that they're ready for the next level. And we want that evidence to come from multiple sources because there's no one measure of that. And we'll be talking a little about that in later slides. So what does ESSA say must be included in an accountability model? There are certain areas, certain items that you must include. One of them is the achievement scores on your state test, and that is the proficiency target. In our state, that target is level 3 or higher, which is meets expectations or higher on our SC Ready test, or a C or higher on the end of course tests. So we have to track those scores and we have to do subgroup analysis for that. We also have an opportunity to include either growth or another state achievement test. And in our state, we feel very passionate about using a growth metric. So for our elementary and middle schools, we will be using a growth metric using the state test to measure both achievement and growth. You may be asking, well, why isn't there a growth metric for high school? Because high school uses the end of course assessments and they are typically a one and done, you take the test one time when you sit for the course, there's not a growth metric opportunity available. Graduation rates we've talked about. We'll be using the 4-year graduation rate for the state goal. Schools will also be given a credit for a 5-year graduation rate. And then finally, English language proficiency. Progress and proficiency in English language is required. Accountability Work Group 1 has been heavily focused on these 4 metrics and how they should function and count, and I appreciate their work there. ESSA says you've got to give these 4 substantial consideration or substantial weight in your accountability model. But also, ESSA asked the question, what else would a state like to include in accountability? And if you look at the indicator in blue and in green, ESSA gives you 2 other types of indicators that you could include in the accountability model: student success indicators and school quality indicators. And if you'll pay attention when you see the blue and the green coming up in later slides, those will indicate what we're considering our student success indicators and our school quality indicators. So this slide says, what else can you include in accountability? You can include items like student engagement, which is a school quality indicator, completion of advanced coursework, post-secondary readiness, which we call college and career readiness, or CCR, and that is a student success indicator, school climate or safety indicators, that's another school quality indicator, and then it says other, as determined by the state. These can be considered in accountability models, but they must be given less weight than the items that I talked about in the prior slide. And again, you can see at the bottom of this slide, we've had 2 accountability groups working on these. One worked on the student engagement piece and the other worked on the college and career ready. So in the long run, you have to have the indicators that are required and those that you choose to do from school quality and student success, and you have to organize them or count them in a way that allows you to meaningfully differentiate schools and districts and be able to identify those schools and districts that need comprehensive support and intervention. So this very busy slide is your overview or your one-stop shop of looking at the accountability model. And so at the top, I'm going to break it down for you. At the top you see our macro goal: by 2030, 90% of students will graduate college and career ready. Down on the left side, you see the different levels of report cards that we will be producing. We'll have a South Carolina report card, a district report card, a high school, a middle school, and an elementary school. And then across the top, you will see the leading performance indicators. Those leading performance indicators should be reflective of the slides you just heard me read that are requirements for ESSA and options for ESSA. So the first 4 are the required ones that must be given substantial weight: achievement, growth, graduation rate, and English language proficiency. And you can see the tests that we use in each of those to measure those categories. Then you can see in blue the student success indicator, as in we're calling that column the Prepared for Success section of the accountability model. And then finally the student engagement section, which is called the Effective Learning Environment Student Engagement Survey. And that's our school quality indicator that we are discussing. So those are your 6 leading indicators. Not all 6 apply to all schools. For example, if you follow that growth category all the way down, you can see that for high school, growth is not an option, so it's grayed out there and says not applicable. Similarly, if you follow the graduation rate column all the way down, you can see that elementary and middle schools don't have graduation rates. So in general, each level will have 5 items, and the high school and the district will actually have 6 indicators or items that are feeding into the accountability model, potentially, if all 6 of these are formally approved. And so, you know, I can certainly read all of these slides to you, these sections to you, but I think you can see there that there's tests that are indicated and options that are indicated in each of these. One of the things I will highlight is that there is some discussion at the elementary and middle school level of reducing some of the testing that we have been doing in South Carolina. ESSA does not require science and social studies testing every year. It does require that you do science testing at least once in elementary and once in middle. So you can see a reflection here of some potential grades that we could test science. We do believe that social studies is important and civics education is important, and so we are proposing also, even though it's not required by ESSA, to have 2 grades tested for social studies, grade 5 and grade 7. We don't want science and social studies teachers to think that we do not value their subjects. We at the department will be working to develop some performance task assessments and other items that we can give to districts locally at other grade levels that they may continue to use to assess those areas. But these would be formal check-in assessment grades for the subjects that you see there. And I'm going to skip over now to the student success column, the prepared for success, and I am going to slow down on this one, and you're going to see some slides that follow that explain those in a little more detail. And I want to focus first on the high school. If you can see at the high school and at the district level, we're going to be proposing multiple ways that a student might be college or career ready. Remember I said we want students to walk across that stage with some evidence that they have prepared themselves for the next level, whether that is work, whether that's military, whether that is 2-year or 4-year colleges. So I'm going to be describing to you in slides coming up about some ways we're looking at all of the assessments that you see there. If you look at middle school and elementary school, we also feel very strongly that the profile of the South Carolina graduate emphasizes those life and career characteristics. So we are investigating opportunities to look at soft skill assessments, social emotional learning assessments for the elementary and middle school. We know those are very formative years where students are developing a lot of their character traits that they ultimately need to demonstrate in the workplace, and so we would like to look at some instruments that measure those soft skills in those grades. Also notice the words report only. Across the nation, many states are looking at soft skill assessments or employability skill assessments as another term that you'll see for that. And they're so emergent in that work that there are not a lot of states yet ready to set metrics for accountability around those. And so we're proposing that for a few years that we simply collect the data and report it on the report card, but not count it for accountability. So that one will not count for elementary or middle. But then you see over to the right the student engagement survey that would count for all levels, and I'm going to talk about that student engagement survey on another slide. Finally, down at the bottom of this matrix, you will see what we are calling the other drivers for continuous improvement. District stakeholders know very much about the advanced data accreditation process. All but 6 districts in South Carolina are a part of this accreditation process, and many of the 6 that aren't involved are already investigating being a part of it. But it looks at drivers for continuous improvement, and it looks at 5 systems that schools constantly examine their performance and leverage their improvement efforts around. And so the question in accountability is, do we count that work in some way? Do we give districts credit for that work? And so we are having those discussions at this point in time, but no final decision has been made. And then finally, there are schools at the school level who are engaged in personalized learning or other specialized certifications, such as STEM, Leader in Me, Middle Years IB, Primary Years IB, and so on. There are many others. If a school had an externally validated school-wide program, such as a STEM certification, should that school have some credit in the accountability model? Once again, we're discussing that. We have not reached any final decision. So now let's break those down just a little bit to give you some idea of how they might work in an accountability model. Remembering that each of those leading indicators that I just told you must be broken down by subgroups. So anything that you put in the accountability model, you must remember it has to be able to be broken down by subgroup. Let's talk about the Prepared for Success student success indicator first. So we are proposing multiple metrics for college and career ready at our high school level. Let's talk about the first one. The first one bullet that you see is maybe a student could be college and career ready if on the grade 11 assessment that the state pays for, which is the ACT, the student meets the benchmark of 22 in reading or 18 in English or 22 in math. Those benchmarks are set by ACT. They are the benchmarks that predict a student being likely to make a B or higher in the college, corresponding college course in their freshman year of college. And so you can see in red, just like you'll see on the draft on the State Department's website, we're debating whether that is the reading score, we want to set that metric, or if we want to choose the English score. And the English score is the predictor for Composition 101 or English 101, and the math score is the predictor for college algebra. So those two seem logical, but we're also looking at the reading score. A student might also be college or career ready if they meet what we're calling a common cut score across all the assessments that colleges use in our state to admit a student, and those are the ACT, SAT, and then the two-year schools often use an AccuPlacer score. It used to be a Compass score, but now it's called an AccuPlacer score. If they can meet a common cut score to take a credit-bearing course. What do we mean by that? Well, when you take a college entrance test, particularly when you are taking an AccuPlacer style test, those scores predict whether you're ready to take a college credit-bearing course or whether you're going to take a remediation course. What we are asking our technical schools and our institutions of higher ed to do is to work collaboratively with us to identify an ACT composite score or a reading and math score, an SAT composite score or a reading and math score, and an AccuPlacer score that would be allowed anywhere in the state of South Carolina. If a student hit that score, they could take a credit-bearing course, i.e. they would not be eligible for remediation. And so we are very happy to tell you that the Commission on Higher Ed and the Technical College Board are working with us on that, and we hope to hear something from them very soon. The third way you could be college or career ready is if you're already taking college courses in high school and you are successful in those courses. And so what does successful mean? Well, on AP across our state, 3 or higher on an AP exam is accepted in colleges, so that could be a criteria. A 4 or higher in IB courses is accepted, so that could be a criteria. And then finally, for dual credit, we realize that dual credit there's a variety of offerings across our state. We would be looking at those dual credit courses for a 2-year transfer program, okay, to be admitted into an associate's degree program. And we may have a threshold of an 80 or higher. We have talked about what that threshold could be, and we have not made a final decision for dual credit courses yet. So that's the college side. What about the career ready side? Well, a student could be career ready by the end of grade 12 if the student meets one of these criteria: a silver or higher on WorkKeys, or a 31 or higher on the ASVAB test. ASVAB is our military test, and many of our students graduate from high school and go right into the military and have very successful careers, and so we do not want to leave that group out. Or a student could be career ready if they complete a state career and technical education program, an ROTC program, or an arts program. I'm also delighted to tell you that another side accountability work group has been our arts community, and they have been working very hard to determine what an arts completer program would look like, as well as providing an external validation at the end of that program that would say that a student is college ready for the arts or career ready for the arts. So if a student was a completer in any of those 3 programs and earned some state-approved industry credential or some external measure for ROTC, would be the ASVAB, or the arts external measure, they would be career ready. And then finally, the third option is not widely used across our state, but is growing, and that is if the student could complete an approved youth apprenticeship. So you can see from the last 2 slides, if we want students to graduate with some kind of credential that shows they're ready for the next level, they've got multiple options in this model of what they could do to meet that. And what we would report on the accountability model and count in the accountability model would be the percent of students who meet either the college or the career. And then we would also report the percent of students who meet them both, which would certainly be a bonus. But what about for elementary and for middle? We've talked a lot about the high school prepared for success. Well, here's where you see a slide that describes the soft skills inventory and some rationale as to why we chose it. So if you look at the social emotional learning outcomes for grades 3 through 8, there are models or there are instruments out there that measure a myriad of things. But we would like to focus on those scales that most closely relate to the profile of the South Carolina graduate. So those are grit, which is tied to perseverance, growth mindset, which is also tied to perseverance, self-management, which gets at our self-direction, classroom effort, which gets at the work ethic, social awareness, which gets to the interpersonal skills and the integrity, and then the learning strategies, which also gets to your classroom work ethic and understanding how you learn as a learner and what it takes for you to study. We think there are nice connections between these soft skill assessments and those areas of the profile of the graduate, and would like to explore those as a report-only metric in the accountability model. And then finally, the last one, the school quality indicator, we would like to examine the learning environment that students are in. And for the first time in accountability in our state, we would like for the student voice to be a part of the accountability model. And so one of the things that schools are highly engaged in is an observation tool called the Elliott that they use as a part of their advanced ed accreditation. And the Elliott looks at equitable learning environments, high expectations happening in the classroom, whether students have opportunities for supportive learning, whether or not students are actively learning in the classroom, whether or not students are getting progress monitoring and feedback from the teachers when they're experiencing difficulties, if the classroom is well managed, and if students, not teachers, but students have opportunities to use technology, digital learning. So this inventory looks at those scales from the student's perspective, and it asks the students to rate the quality of each of those experiences in those 7 learning environments. We feel like this is a nice tie for what schools are already looking at, so it's not an add-on in the accountability model, and it also gives some empowerment to our students to tell us what's working for them. And then finally, you saw at the bottom of that kind of busy slide, the other drivers for continuous improvement, and those are the advanced ed accreditation systems that you see on the left for the district level, and the special school certifications that you see on the right. And the key question there that we're seeking input on is, do we put these in the accountability model as a report item? Are these things that our public just wants to hear reported? Or is this something that we should provide as a bonus or in some type of incentive for schools to engage meaningfully in these types of activities? Reporting outcomes for accountability. One of the places that we have not had time yet to do a lot of group discussion is on final determinations and performance designations. I'm going to present some ideas or concepts here. Again, I would like to say we're still in the infancy in discussing these, and we certainly welcome all feedback in this area. So a performance determination, when you think about the 5 or 6 categories that we're looking at in accountability, and you see those listed on the left, achievement, growth or graduation rate, depending on your level, English language proficiency, prepared for success, and effective learning environment. One approach is to present a summative score for each of those areas individually. That's called a dashboard approach. And in the dashboard approach, you don't sum all of the points up for each of these into one final score. You simply give a summative score. How is the school doing in achievement? How is the school doing in growth or graduation rate? How is the school doing in English language proficiency? And you can see I put on this screen just a colorful key performance indicator graphic that would help you see. We would set metrics to determine schools that are green, doing very well on that, schools that are yellow that aren't doing as well but are kind of in the middle, and then schools that are not. And you would see a dashboard that would show how schools are performing in those. And so the numbers would be meaningful. The sections, the colors would have meaningful numbers around it based on the points the school or district earned. So that's one way we could present the information. The other way is called a weighted point index. And a weighted point index takes those 5 or 6 categories and it weights them a lot of like similar to what a teacher does in her grade book. She might say tests count 40 or 60% and quizzes count 30%, homework counts 10%. So by doing that, the teacher is weighting what's important, and that's what happens on a weighted point index. So you can see some sample numbers there. Those are not numbers that are numbers we've talked about. That's just there for you to get an idea of what a weighted point index would do. And generally, when you include a weighted point index, you usually sum those up into a single summative rating. So you would say achievement, add your achievement points, weight them 25%, add your growth and graduation points, weight those 25%, and so on and so forth, and then sum it up to a final score. If we do have a final score, and that's part of what we're discussing, do we want a dashboard where there's 6 or 5 or 6 individual scores on the different areas, or do we want one summative score? We have to determine what those final ratings are going to be called. In our current state report card, we use words like excellent, good, average, and we're talking about in this accountability model 4 rating levels. We would like to use exceeds expectations as the highest performance designation if we do have one summative rating. Meets expectations as the second highest, approaches expectations, and below expectations for the bottom. What ESSA requires, excuse me, it skipped a slide, is that however you decide to set up the points in your accountability system, and if you decide to use a dashboard approach with decision matrix on how to identify your top and your bottom, or if you decide to use the weighted point index with a numerical formula, the bottom line is what you're doing that for is to identify those schools that are not doing as well as they need to, who need a comprehensive support and intervention. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and these metrics again are still under discussion, but what ESSA requires is that schools who are not performing well, that they be identified at least once every 3 years. So you may ask, why once every 3 years? What we know about school improvement is that school improvement does not happen in 1-year intervals. When schools are performing significantly below average, it takes 2 to 3 years for improvement to gain momentum and for the outcomes of the work that the teachers and the principals are doing in that school to show in test scores and other metrics. So what ESSA allows that I think is very positive is it allows you to identify the schools that need comprehensive support and intervention and guarantee that for 3 years they're going to receive funding and support to meet their improvement efforts. And then you would re-identify. What we can do in South Carolina is we can look at schools' performance every year and formally identify every 3 years. And if new schools pop into the group in the off years, we can set aside some special project funds to help those schools because it looks like their data is trending downward and they may end up identified at the next go around. And we have plans to do that in the draft model that you'll see on the website. But who would we identify every 3 years? We would identify as a mandate from ESSA any of your Title I schools who are performing in the bottom 5%. We would also identify non-Title I schools who are performing in the bottom 5%, and high schools with graduation rates lower than 67%. And I think that that's going to climb in our graduation rate model to be less than 70% because we have moved our graduation rate up in South Carolina, and we would probably set a threshold at 70. We also have an opportunity to identify schools for comprehensive support and intervention if you have a chronically low performing subgroup. And you can see our definition of chronically low performing is that any subgroup that has been identified for targeted support and intervention for at least 3 years. And I'll talk about targeted support next. The other category that ESSA requires us to identify to provide support intervention is the targeted support intervention, and that is schools, those are schools that specifically have problems with their subgroup performance. And ESSA requires that you look at two groups there. It requires you to look at low-performing subgroups and consistently underperforming subgroups. So low-performing subgroups, as defined by our state model, are schools with one or more subgroups performing as poorly as the same subgroup in any of our bottom 5% schools. So any virtually high-performing school that has a subgroup performing where the bottom 5% of schools are performing could have a subgroup gap. So that's one. And then secondly, your consistently underperforming subgroups that we've defined as schools with one or more historically underperforming subgroups. That is one standard deviation below the state's performance in that subgroup for 2 consecutive years. Those schools are also entitled for increased funding and interventions to support their subgroup growth. I will end with this slide. There is a great deal of concern and discussion in our state about the new Read to Succeed law that will begin the same year this accountability model kicks in, which will require us to look very closely at third graders who are reading significantly below grade level. Because that law has a retention clause that students can be retained, there's some discussion that we need to really focus on what's happening in our early childhood literacy and numeracy, but particularly literacy. So early in our accountability discussions, we talked a lot about, do we need some type of early childhood report on the accountability model, on the report card? Or does it need to be in some other portion of our state report? And so I put this slide in to tell you that the discussion about, is there something we can look at that's happening in our K-2 literacy programs across our state that would indicate students who are and are not reading on grade level beginning at kindergarten, first, and second grade? And we would look at their performance at the end of those grades, so that would be a spring to spring look, so spring of kindergarten, spring to first grade, spring to second grade. The considerations that make this a complicated decision is the fact that there's no single summative assessment in grades K-2, and we're certainly not proposing testing young children on a state summative test. But we do, across the districts, use a myriad of formative assessments that indicate on grade level reading. The challenge for an accountability model is streamlining the 6 or 7, maybe more, 8 or 9, different formative assessments that districts use into some type of report on a report card. And we're still working through that challenge. We have our Instructional Leaders Roundtable and our Early Childhood Roundtable with SCASA working with us to identify some possible solutions. We're also considering a website that's completely focused on early childhood. I'm partnering with our Children's Trust, with DSS, DHHS, First Steps, and others to create a birth to grade 3 website that would focus on this early childhood piece. We need your input, and at this point in time, we're going to stop the presentations and begin the question and answer. And so we would like to open that up for any questions that you have, and we will try to have our moderator field those, and we'll answer those questions.
Thank you, Sheila. This is Scott Winburn. I know we are approaching 7:30, and I think we've had a lively discussion via chat, so I appreciate all of those that participated. Given that it's 7:30, here's what I propose. What we are doing, if we didn't say earlier, we are gathering all of the questions that were asked via chat, so we will have those. If you have any specific questions that we were not able to get to, please just email me. Again, my email is swinburn@ed.sc.gov. Go to our website. You're free to submit comments that way as well. But please do email me. What we'll develop is a frequently asked questions document so that we can capture what was asked today and your questions for the future. So please take a minute to do that. Write your questions in, and we can still capture those today. But since it is 7:30, we'll conclude the webinar. But one more reminder: on the 21st of November, we will host a focus group meeting. And so be on the lookout for an invitation for that. We'll post that on our website. And again, please read the proposed draft framework posted on our website. Read it in detail and provide specific feedback. So thank you very much for participating, and at this point, this will conclude our webinar.